Hello everyone and welcome to part 3 of this series where we have gone through the top 28, in other words all of them, Bleed 2 bosses. So in this final part we are gonna go through the top 10 entries of this list. But before you proceed in this video, if you want to know the previous entries, please feel free to look up the 2 videos that are gonna be scrolling up here a little bit here before you proceed. If you have looked through them now, or if you are just not interested in anything but the top 10, well, feel free to continue now, and we will delve into the final 10 of this list. On spot number 10, we find the Whale Core. The Whale Core is a very simple boss mechanically, but due to its high HP total and how hard some of the mechanics in this boss fight is to handle perfectly, this is still a very interesting boss fight this late in the game. The core refrain of this boss fight is that it shoots a lot of missiles across the screen. Some of them are going to be purple though, and you really want Reflector for this boss to go past. So between these, the boss are going to do a couple of mechanics. The mechanics are that it's either going to drop bombs, or it's going to shoot a big laser on you, or it's going to go downwards across the screen. Each one of these are handled differently, but it's very intuitive how you are supposed to handle these mechanics. This fight is a pretty simple fight though, but it's very entertaining to do, and the fact that boss is a huge HP sponge really makes this fight last as long as it's needed to make it a very good final stage boss fight. And it's a very entertaining fight, so this fight is definitely very much worthy of being on the number 10 spot here. On spot number 9, we find the Chef Spammer. The Chef Spammer is a pretty interesting fight in that its refrain and core parts are playing so well into one another. What I mean with this is that the boss is gonna shoot out a lot of things during the refrain part, and those are sticking around during the core parts, and are gonna affect how easily or difficult you are gonna find those mechanics to handle. The first mechanic is that the boss guy's been around, and this is probably the one where how well you handle the first part is gonna play in how easy this part is gonna get. If you handle the first part very well and there isn't much trash at all on the screen, this part is gonna be superbly easy, because there's gonna be so little trash on the screen for you to dodge. So you can basically often just stand there and just deal full damage on the boss without any bells to it. The second one is that the boss can start sucking in the trash, and while what you have done previously is going to affect this pattern quite a bit in how hard it initially is to perform it, there is going to be an endless supply of trash outside of the screen. So you are never really gonna have nothing to do during this phase, sadly. So there's like no way to avoid this one. This makes this probably the hardest one of the mechanics to handle, but it's still a pretty doable mechanic to handle even then. And the third one is that the boss can shoot out some bombs, which are going to be either purple or yellow. As always, reflect the purple, ignore the yellow. This means that this boss fight feels very natural to play, and good gameplay is getting very rewarded here, while bad gameplay is gonna get you slowly buried under a heap of So yeah, there is really nothing else to say here. This is a very phenomenally designed boss fight that really makes your previous gameplay carry over into the upcoming stages, and that is just such a rewarding field to play. This boss feels so rewarding to play even though it's a relatively simple boss due to this. On spot number 8, we find the Spider Core MK2. This boss fight is a very simple fight, but due to how well it plays into the overall story arc of the final stage, I really must say that I really appreciate this fight. The core mechanics of this fight are pretty easy, and this is a zero gravity stage, but the mechanics here are very much playing on it in another way than in the previous 2 fights here, and some of the things here could not have been done if this fight wasn't in zero gravity, I feel. I strongly feel it. the main thing that would be very hard to do if this was a zero gravity boss fight is the mechanic where the boss shoots out two wheels that are going from the top to the bottom and shoots out a barrage of bullets along the way. And you have to cut out your way with the katana to get a beautiful wave in the purple. It's very hard to explain it in a better way, but this part really helps enhance this fight a lot. Because it's a zero gravity fight. And the other mechanics as well are really playing off this fact. However, this fight is pretty easy. 2 of the 4 core mechanics are pretty much free to dodge. And the third one is free as soon as you realize the fact that the best way to avoid the big laser is basically stand next to Spider's legs. It's really not a hard fight at all, but it's a very satisfying fight to play because of how impactful every single thing feels. Due to the fact that Spider is gonna fall all over the place, and there are big, powerful, impactful explosions here and there, and in fact you are basically falling into the next fight from the previous one. It's placed so well into the overarching story of this stage, and therefore this is a very solid fight, and I feel like this fight definitely deserves the number 8 spot due to this. On spot number 7 we find Valentine A, and he is a very good stage 1 boss of this fight. What makes this fight so extremely powerful is that it really shows off what Valentine is all about. He is using her minions in all imaginable ways to try to defeat Vryn. Even if Vryn taunts, like, yeah, she does the hero thing, the enemies are gonna attack her from off screen, and the whole crowd is like against Vryn. Every single person is against Vryn. And this is a little thing that's gonna go throughout this entire fight, where the crowd is slowly and steadily changing from rooting for Valentine to rooting for Vryn. And this first part is explaining why. Every single one of Valentine's mechanics here are strongly making use of the enemies or her allies in very devastating ways for them to try to destroy Vryn. This is apparently gonna go on throughout both of the first stages, but it's very much shown here with the barrage of the flies and the kittens jumping all over the place. This is a very powerful fight to play through, as it just shows off just how evil Valentine is and how far she is willing to go to defeat Vryn. The fight's relatively easy, the mechanics are relatively easy, but there are some big room here to reward good gameplay. In that if you angle yourself perfectly, you can basically make it through most of the mechanics here without having to sacrifice too much damage uptime at all. It's such a satisfying and powerful fight really to play, and it's definitely worth it to be this high up on this list due to the combination of its extremely powerful effect on Valentine as a character, and on how extremely fun this part of the fight is to perform, even though it's a little bit easy. On spot number 6, we find another one of these extremely cinematic fights that are really highlighting the progress of this game, and that is Rex Rocket. Rex Rocket is shooting down Rival's big car, and you are jumping across his rockets towards the boss and finally defeating him to enter the spaceship. This fight is a really interesting fight in that you are not having any floor to stand on, but you have to make use of the rockets the boss is shooting at you in an attempt to defeat you, to basically jump across the stage and finally defeat him. The mechanics in this fight are, generally speaking, pretty tame. The only really huge one is that the boss can shoot a big purple rocket that you have to reflect. It can also be yellow, so you don't have to reflect it, but yeah, that is another matter for another day. That is not really that's not really the mechanic here. The mechanic here is the big purple rocket. Everything else here is really small things that complements the fact you have to jump across the big rockets towards the boss. And this works. This works so wonderfully well because it's such a unique boss fight in this game. And it's really a unique boss fight in general. in that you have to make use of what the boss gives you. You have to make use of I'm not gonna say completely unpredictable pattern, but it's a little bit on the more chaotic side for a game like this. This makes this boss fight pretty interesting. And what makes this fight even harder is the fact that the hitbox for this boss fight is not really what you think it is. You might think that the hitbox is a big rocket on the boss and that your goal is to destroy it, but no, there is a little guy hanging off of that rocket and shoots them. That is your hitbox. So until you figure that out, this fight can be very rough and very long. But once you figure out the hitbox, the fight gets another dimension in that you are gonna have to try to find a way to always have that little enemy in range. And it's such a fun, entertaining and deep fight to try to find out the best routing for every single pattern the boss gives you. And there's like really nothing else like this in the entire game. And that makes this fight a very good candidate for being this high on this list. And this combined with how extremely fun this mechanic is to perform in action is wonderful. There is no way this boss fight could make it in the top 10. And I think it definitely deserves this position by flying colors. On spot number 5 and our first top 5 entry is Valentine T. This boss fight is very much a fight where the refrain part of the fight is the bread and butter. She is gonna teleport all over the stage and aim a big laser at you. If you shoot her, you will dispel it, but beware, you have to shoot her 3 times to get to the next phase. And if she misses you with the laser for an extended period of time, or she's shooting for an extended period of time, you are simply going to be allowed into the next phase no matter what. So if you see the laser and you haven't shot her and it's very close to ending that phase, it might be wiser to not shoot her at all. Her core mechanics, the verses of the fight as we call them, are pretty simple, most of them, but there is one to very much keep in mind here, and that's pretty fun and that really adds to her. And that's when she is creating portals and starts to go through them all over the stage. This is a very interesting mechanic, but it's also very rough to dodge. And the final part, she's going to turn either purple or yellow. You know the drill at this point. If she turns purple, reflect. If she turns yellow, do not reflect really. This is a very interesting fight at the end of the... Not really at the end, but the fight afterwards is pretty simple compared to this one. It's a pretty interesting fight after the first 2 fights. It basically tests out your endurance, because this fight can be very hard, especially at the higher difficulty levels. And especially compared to most other boss fights in this game. This is a very interesting fight that really tests your aim. It's also a very fun fight mechanically speaking, as this is the fight where she has to stop relying on her allies because they have started to betray her. On the number 4 spot we find the Crawling Core. The Crawling Core is another extremely unique fight in this game, in that you are actually moving forward in this fight. You have to keep moving forward to avoid the enemy. There is a strategy that doesn't involve it, but that strategy is both very hard to perform and very much of a key strat. The main mechanic here is that you are simply gonna move forward from the boss and dig yourself deeper into the tunnel without taking any hits. There is a little bit of a reward here though for not destroying too many blocks, and each block the boss is hitting is gonna deal a bunch of damage to the bot. A little bunch of damage, but it really adds up over time, and in theory it is actually possible to defeat this boss without shooting at it once. It's a nice little challenge you can do for yourself. But despite this mechanic, there are a couple of more core mechanics or mechanic versus where the boss is going to either dash forward as normal. If it turns purple, reflect. If it doesn't turn purple, just avoid it. Or the boss can decide to shoot a big laser, or the boss can speed up and really force you to rush forward. This boss is one of these super unique boss fights that are really entertaining to play, but it's also very challenging at the beginning, and this is one of the boss fights that new players might find themselves struggling quite a bit on. That once they learn, this gonna seem like such an easy boss fight compared to when they started with it, as this is one of those fights that really strongly rewards skillful gameplay. And that really ensures that this fight is gonna end up on the number 4 spot of this list. On spot number 3 we find the rival, who is the final boss of this game. This is one of the most mechanically intensive fights in the game. But it is also a ridiculously fun fight despite that. This fight has 5 mechanics and not really a refrain to speak of, except the rival is gonna stand along and do nothing. I am gonna separate these mechanics into 2 camps, good mechanics and bad mechanics, because this is really how they're treated, except one mechanic is kinda in the middle. The good mechanics the boss can do are the ones you can reflect, and it gives you a big payoff for doing so. The bad mechanics are mechanics that are gonna make it way rougher for you to actually hit the boss. The good mechanics are the gun and the big ball. The gun is gonna be the boss running around and shooting with a gun at you and shoot a lot of bullets to reflect. But that is not where the reflecting part is coming in. At the end of it all, the boss is gonna start to do a kick towards you. The kick is gonna be either purple or yellow. As you all know by this time, purple reflect, yellow not reflect. The big ball is gonna jump up in the air, and you're gonna do the classic tennis game that has been such a core staple of video games since its introduction, where the boss can shoot out a big energy ball at you and you are gonna reflect back and forth, back and forth. In theory, if the ball was yellow, you wouldn't reflect it, but this attack is, as Bryn, always a purple one, so you can always reflect one. The bad mechanics are rocket launcher, where the boss can run around the stage and shooting a big rocket launcher at you, and a mechanic where the boss can pick up the katana and basically act like the ninja in the previous earlier in the game. There is a fifth mechanic that doesn't fall into any of these categories, which is a big rocket that shoots down. This is basically an opportunity to free damage, but you don't get any increased damage opportunities here. This boss, due to how extremely varied it is and how varied every single mechanic feel and how extremely fun they feel to execute, this is one of the most fun games in the game. This is definitely a boss that is at the very top of this game, and a very good ending at the game. Very strong finish for this game. But despite this, there are still 2 more entries on this list, and we are gonna count them down now. On spot number 2, we find Red. Or Red Sprite. Red Sprite, or Red as I'm gonna call her, is one of the most action-packed bosses in this entire game. She always has a lot of enemies flying around the screen, and she is gonna shoot a lot of bullets at you to reflect at her. Big bullets, so you won't really reflect them. As always, purple reflect, yellow do not reflect. This boss fight is one of the most interesting in the game because due to how the enemies moves and due to how her bullets work and how she's flying around, this fight never has a quiet moment. You're always dodging something or aiming to hit something, which makes this one of the most intense fights in the entire game. There isn't much else to this except for these 2 mechanics, except that she does a couple of little things between the patterns. She's yellow gonna shoot between 3 to 4 bullets, somewhere between 3 to 4, 2 to 4, somewhere like that. And then she's gonna do one thing. Those things are most often that she's gonna travel from one side of the screen to the other, but sometimes she just stays up and basically makes every single enemy on the screen target you. This attack is a little rough to dodge at first, but once you learn a very interesting attack to dodge. The funny thing with this attack is that you have to dodge in such a way that's gonna be easy for you to reflect the next bullet she shoots in case it's purple, and it's easy to dodge in case it's yellow. This was a fight that really puts heavy emphasis on positioning yourself in good position on the screen to bait uphold perfect damage while still being able to dodge everything. And this makes this one of the most fun fights in the entire game, and definitely one of the most enjoyable fights in the entire game to play.
On the number 1 spot we find Robo White, and this is very much a very well deserved place. There is a lot of reasoning for this, but the main reason I gotta go into here is that I think that this boss is really incorporating everything good about the other 2 bosses It is a fight that is very much filling up the formula of the Bleed 2 boss fights, but it's also managing to do very well in not making any part of the fight feel boring for people. How this fight is performing this is quite elegant and quite wonderful in that it makes the fight harder for people who want to play it at a harder level, while still making the fight quite manageable for people who are not as experienced with the game. The main thing in this fight is that the Robo White has a shield that goes around it with a little opening. A skilled player can actually spin around the boss for the entirety of the fight and literally shoot at the boss at all times while dodging the rockets it shoots out. A less experienced player can easily opt out of this and only hurt the boss while the boss is shooting out its little wheel, and you can reflect then basically a lot of damage to the boss. Both of these ways are very viable ways to fight against the boss, and which way you choose to do it is very dependent on your skill level. This makes this a boss that's actually very good both for new players and for experienced players. And having a boss like this in the middle of the game is actually quite elegant, as it makes the mid-game a little rough for people who are good at the game, while still not being too rough on people who are not as good at the game. The boss has two big mechanics, and the first one of them is when it shoots out the shield. As said before, you can either reflect it or ignore it and just go up and shoot the boss. If you do it like that, the boss will be open for longer, but generally speaking, unless your aim is very good, you won't deal more damage. And especially if you are spinning around the boss and you play on new game, it's very easy to keep on doing damage on the boss even when it's spinning around. So this might be worth to reflect, it might not be worth it. All depends on your skill level. This is what makes this boss so very good, that you can really decide what stuff you do with this boss depending on your skill level. And the second thing is that the boss is gonna put the shield towards you and then shoot a lot of rockets that you have to dodge. Generally speaking, this boss is just elegant. This is a very elegant, very hard, and very forgiving boss. New players can do whatever they want here. They don't have to do any rough strats, and experienced players can just go to town and have a blast fighting up against this rough boss who is, with the hardest strats, probably one of the most hard and action-packed boss in the entire game. There won't ever be a moment in this boss fight when you're just idling and not really doing anything. It's constant action if you want that. This means that this boss is very much cemented into the first place, and there is really no boss that can even compete with it. So that was the final part of my top 28 Bleed 2 bosses video. Now with all of the cards on the table, what do you think, everyone? Were there any bosses you think I should have put higher? Any boss I think should have put lower? Or any really huge surprises that you were pleased to see? As always, feel very free to put your opinions about the list in the comment section below, and feel free to press the little subscribe button and the little like button. The subscribe button will make sure that you get future content from me. And yeah, this was a wonderful list to do. I am very sorry this video took a long time to make. I'm not gonna put up excuses, but my microphone broke down and I had to get a new microphone because I couldn't keep on recording the entire thing with the same microphone that I had before. And therefore, there was a break between I could do some part of the video and some other parts of the video, and you will probably hear the sound difference between the two microphones I'm using. But yeah, I will go back to try to post weekly videos again soon, or bi-weekly, depending on how things are looking. But yeah, this was a wonderful list to do. And as I said, if you agree with the list, please feel free to say so and say what you like. And if you disagree with it, please give me your opinion where things should be put on the list in relation to one another. It was a very hard list to do, as I've said many times during the list, as a lot of the bosses in this game are very good. It was very hard to put some bosses as low on the list as I had to, because they are objectively good boss fights. But in a game with 26 objectively good boss fights, one of the fights has to be on the 26th spot. So have a good one everyone, and stay safe, and stay cute, and stay wonderful. Until next time, have a good one, and see you then. Bye bye!